Howdy again everyone. Now, one of my favourite lines of cameras of all time are the Fuji X-T10 series. Whenever a new one comes out, they tend to contain some of Fuji's very best technology, along with an electronic viewfinder, small size, classic aesthetic, and relatively affordable price. And in the past, I've owned both the X-T20 and the X-T10, which also happened to be my first mirrorless camera. Well, out of the way everyone, here comes the X-T50 with a whole bunch of amazing technology from the much more expensive X-T5, including a 40 megapixel sensor, in-body stabilization, and video footage up to 6.2K, amazing, and that's up to 30 frames per second in 10-bit 422. The camera's body is as compact and good looking as ever, yet with some subtle design improvements too, and it comes with a black, charcoal silver or silver finish. However, the camera's price of $1,400 or £1,300 without a kit lens, or $1,800 with the very nice and capable new XF 16-50mm kit lens, is considerably higher than earlier cameras in this series, making it a far less affordable option. In fact, it's only about $300 less than the big Fuji X-T5. But with all those new features, it could well be worth the price. Let's see. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Fuji UK for loaning me this camera for a couple of weeks for testing. Although, as usual, this is a totally independent review. They have had no input into this video at all. Some of the other features of this new camera are full and improved subject recognition and tracking autofocus of the kind you see on the X-T5, along with that camera's same X processor 5 in order to handle that 40 megapixel workflow, a camera to cloud function, and some other tweaks and changes. Let's take a look. As you can see, the camera is as handsome as ever, and although it's small, it feels relatively heavy duty, although not as tough as the X-T5. It's actually very slightly bigger than its predecessors, with more of a grip around the handle, which is a more than welcome addition actually. The camera is now much more comfortable to hold, and Fuji have made some improvements to its controls too. Firstly, only a few months ago, in my review of the X100 Mark VI camera, I was talking about how I wished Fuji would put a film simulator dial with the camera's controls, and presto, here it is. A brilliant move by Fuji in my opinion, as their gorgeous film situations are a unique selling point of their entire system, and 3 of the options on here are customizable also. As you turn that dial, Fuji show you on screen the details of what film simulation you're choosing. I'm a big fan of that, and I especially love the classic chrome and the various black and white at-cross simulations, and you can also adjust the graininess of them in your camera's menu. Nice! We get plenty more buttons here too, a number of them customizable. It's great to see an autofocus point joystick here, and I like that the play and autofocus on buttons are raised up for an extra tactile feel. I'm loving Fuji's design choices on this camera. The quick menu button is also placed well to the side where you can't accidentally touch it. The camera's touchscreen is bright, high resolution, and flips up and down nice and easily. It doesn't flip out, unfortunately though, making it harder to use for video work, which is a shame, as I thought a lot of video makers might be interested in this camera. A minor disappointment is the electronic viewfinder. It works absolutely fine, does a perfectly good job, but for a camera at this price point, it's actually a bit small and slightly low resolution. Fuji have clearly chosen that feature to do a bit of cost cutting on. On the side of the camera we get micro HDMI, USB-C and a microphone socket. The camera can actually output raw video through HDMI, and a USB-C adapter is available with a headphone socket too. At the bottom we get a single SD card slot and space for a small battery, which lasted an average amount of time in my tests, about 1.5 hours of video shooting or about 350 to 400 still photos. Oh, and the camera has a very small little pop-up flash too, something that can make itself surprisingly helpful from time to time. Obviously there's still a hot shoe here if you need something a bit more powerful. If you're shooting with the mechanical shutter, the camera's maximum burst rate is 8 frames per second, and the buffer lasts for ages. If you switch to electronic shutter mode, then all kinds of other speeds are available, up to 20 frames per second with a crop, and the camera's menu helpfully shows you what your options are. Still shooting modes include JPEG and HEIF, and your RAW shooting options include uncompressed, lossless compressed, or just plain compressed. There's the usual dizzying array of Fuji color and contrast adjustments within the camera's menu too. Something I should mention is that this camera does not feature a high-resolution pixel shift mode though, unlike the X-H2 and X-T5. I could never get decent results out of that on other cameras though. I don't think you're missing out, it was a pain to use. When it comes to autofocus, it's good news here. We have essentially the same system as the X-T5, offering high quality, fast and customizable subject recognition. Like the X-T5 and X-H2, its autofocus system isn't quite as confident and reliable as the latest Sony and Canon cameras, or the Nikon Z8 or Z9 in my opinion. You get more slightly missed shots here, but it's nearly there, and no matter what you're shooting, you're going to get lots of keepers, and it's quite customizable too. Like the X-T5, the X-T50 offers in-body image stabilization. Considering how good Fuji's stabilization systems have always been, even before they were making X-mount cameras, I wasn't surprised to discover it holding my images very steady, whether in stills or video mode. Another great feature, particularly as Fuji are famous for their excellent prime lenses, most of which are not optically stabilized. If you're using a third-party manual focus lens, then you need to set its focal length in a camera's mount adapter setting menu. All in all, it's wonderful build quality here, as I've just been describing. The only issues are its slightly mediocre electronic viewfinder, and anyone with large hands or wanting to use big lenses might really struggle with this thing's smaller body. Alright, well, let's look at what kind of image quality that 40 megapixel sensor can give us. Let's take a quick look at the raw image quality first, up against JPEG, and the base ISO is 125 here, which is nicely lower than older Fuji cameras. The raw image is showing tons of fine detail, as you'd expect from a 40 megapixel sensor. The JPEG image looks good, but a little over-sharpened, leading to a smudging of fine details, I think, which is visible on the rock face in this picture. The JPEG still looks very good, but I've been getting increasingly concerned by over-sharpening on Fuji's JPEG engines, and this was with sharpening set to 0. Still, the image is looking pretty great. Let's see how the camera copes at higher ISO levels. In the top left you see ISO 125, below that ISO 400 is virtually as good, ISO 800 begins to see just a touch of noise but nothing serious, however ISO 1600 is beginning to see some quite noticeable noise, with colours and contrast and fine detail all beginning to suffer. Let's push the ISO even higher, where unfortunately we see further deterioration, with ISO 3200 looking rough, and shooting at 12,800 would only be an act of desperation. So, the X-T50 offers plenty of detail in its images, but as you'd expect from a 40 megapixel sensor, ISO noise levels are pretty high, which you'll notice the most if you're cropping into your pictures. Let's take a quick look at dynamic range when shooting in RAW. As you can see here, the X-T50 can pull a surprisingly nice looking image out of the very dark shadows here. Bravo! This is a better performance than the new Nikon Z6 Mark III camera that I tested a few weeks ago, although in fairness, the Fuji sensor is far slower than that of the Nikon. Also, you can get 13 stops of dynamic range from video footage by shooting in f-log2 mode, which is also impressive. Okay, let's take a look at video quality, with the camera offering a number of video shooting modes, including 6.2K, oversampled 4K with all-I, all in 8 or 10-bit footage, up to 422. Let's start in 6.2K. If you choose to shoot at 50 megabits per second, then the video quality looks terrible, as you can see, so don't do that, unless you want to see horrible footage where every detail is smothered in artifacts. Why did Fuji even include this option in the first place? Well, let's move over to looking at 6.2K at 360 megabits per second. That's way better, unsurprisingly. The footage is very detailed now, although we're seeing noise even just at ISO 400, and ISO 1600 looks rough. ISO 3200 or beyond is looking dreadful. So there's tons of detail at 6.2K, but loads of noise too, unless you shoot at very low ISO levels. Let's look at 4K high quality footage now. We are still getting very good detail here. The video quality looks great at lower ISOs, that is. Again, noise creeps in even just at ISO 400, and ISO 1600 looks rough, with ISO 3200 looking as bad as ever. Ouch. Alright, well, how about 4K standard quality? To be honest, you're still getting quite noticeable noise here, but far less detail, not to mention some false colour and aliasing. Not good. Overall, unless you shoot at low ISO levels, the X-T50 produces rather noisy footage, but the 6.2K and 4K high quality options do offer fantastic video detail, if you can work at those lower ISO levels, that is. It is not a camera for shooting video with in low light conditions. Oh, and there's one more mode to check out, the camera's high-speed 1080p 240 frames per second option. Here it is, and you can see it doing an amazing job of slowing down your footage and capturing lots of fine detail, but unfortunately it's also capturing a lot of false colour and blockiness at the same time. I admit, footage like this is a major stress test for any camera capturing video, but still, I was hoping for slightly better. This camera doesn't have the fastest sensor in the world, so let's take a look at rolling shutter. At 6.2K and 4K high quality, it looks absolutely horrifying, as you can see. In 4K standard quality, it's still pretty bad. For best results, shoot at 1080p, although it's still noticeable in extreme situations here. Wow, that sensor must be pretty slow. Finally, let's take a look at image stabilization for vlogging. Here's some footage at 16mm with no stabilization. Here it is with a standard in-body stabilization, not much better really. And here it is with digital stabilization, which isn't really helping. Bit of a shame there. Overall, I loved the X-T50 as much as the old X-T10 and 20 I used to fool around with. It's a legitimately impressive camera for your money, but it does have its limitations. The key issue is that its picture quality, and especially its video quality, is very detailed but really quite noisy at higher ISO levels. Now, the still image quality isn't so much an issue unless you're cropping into your images, but the video really does not look good if you start going beyond ISO 400, and its very high rolling shutter and poor digital stabilization make it an inflexible option for video work, not to mention that the screen doesn't flip outwards. And while it's awesome to have a 1080p option at 240 frames per second, the quality was rather ugly there too, a real shame. But the good news is that the overall still picture quality is still wonderfully detailed, with good dynamic range and easy access to Fuji's beautiful film simulation modes. The autofocus system, while not quite as accurate as the competition, is still very good, easy to use, and confident at recognizing lots of different subjects, making it fun to use. And Fuji have given the camera some improvements in its controls and build quality also. At this price range, you should also consider the Canon EOS R7 for a better all-round general-purpose camera, albeit one that's a bit more boring and without access to Fuji's excellent lenses. Ditto with the lower resolution Sony a6700, but still, for your $1,400, the Fuji X-T50 gets you a beautiful 40 megapixel image stabilized camera, which does a lot of tasks very well, and it certainly does come recommended, with a few question marks for video makers. Alright, thanks for watching everyone, and if you regularly find yourself watching these reviews and finding them helpful, then check out my Patreon page down in the description, where supporters get all kinds of exclusive bonus content and early access to reviews also. God bless everyone.